Hey y'all, I'm Atticus, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host for tonight's event. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Eli Saslow at our At Home with Literati series in support of Voices from the Pandemic. He will be in conversation with Lizzie Johnson. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping the links to purchase Voices from the Pandemic from Literati throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit any questions at any time. I'll ask a selection of them at the conclusion of the event. A reminder that you can shop for more books in store or at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. And now, allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Eli Saslow is a staff writer for the Washington Post and a contributor to ESPN, the magazine. He has won a Pulitzer Prize and George Polk Award for reporting and has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing. His works include 10 Letters, The Stories Americans Tell Their President, and American Hunger. He lives in Tacoma Park, Maryland, with his wife and 2 daughters. Lizzie Johnson is a reporter on the Washington Post's local enterprise team. Previously a staff writer at the San Francisco Chronicle, she has also worked at the Dallas Morning News, the Chicago Tribune, the Omaha World Herald, and El Sol de San Telmo in Buenos Aires. In 2021, she won the first place for long-form feature writing in the Best of the West contest. She has appeared on Long-Form Podcast, This American Life, Long Reads Podcast, and Climate One from the Commonwealth Club. Her work has been featured in numerous reviews and journals. Johnson was raised in the Midwest, and her dog, Indy, currently they live together in Washington, D.C. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Eli and Lizzie.
Hello,
Awesome.
Eli. How's it going?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for the nice introduction. And hello to Linda and others. Thank you so much for coming and coming to listen to us. Lizzie,
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about journalism, books, etc.
I'm excited to pick your brain. It's like I was telling you the other day. I just got to ask you all of the questions that I've always wanted to ask you, but everyone else gets to hear the answers. Congratulations on your book coming out.
Thank you. You too. Slightly belatedly.
Thank you so much.
How long did yours come out?
It came
3
out
months?
last month.
Last month. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. It's not that belatedly.
Yeah. More belatedly than yours, but
well, that's true.
Yeah.
I guess since you were working on yours for a while, obviously, and the initial fire, since we're somewhat removed from it, that's probably why it seems a little longer ago to me.
Yeah. So to start, I would love to. So your book is based off of all of these beautiful oral stories that you compiled for the Washington Post over the course of the pandemic. And I'm just curious how that project came about and how you did that during the pandemic where we were trapped in our homes and couldn't go anywhere.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is an oral history, and I think the book calls itself an oral history, which is true because it's people narrating their own experiences. But I always feel a little funny saying it because right now the history part feels very aspirational, right? Like we're all still living through the pandemic in such a present way. So I'm very excited for the moment when the book will actually be a history. But really the project began kind of as an accommodation to the moment in terms of the type of journalism that we both like to do. I mean, mostly for the Post, I write these longer narrative pieces where I kind of ideally try to almost embed with the people that I write about. Like if they're going to the doctor, I go to the doctor with them. If they're being deported, I go to Mexico and spend the first week there with them. I'm interviewing them, of course, I'm talking to them, but also I'm trying to use my eyes and my ears. Like I'm listening for dialogue when they're talking to other people. I'm seeing the circumstances of their lives for myself. I think that's a really intimate kind of reporting, and when done right, it leads to these really intimate scenes and memorable moments and stories, and it's kind of where my journalistic heart is, I guess, if that makes sense. But when the pandemic hit, especially in the first months, it became clear that doing that kind of journalism, while maybe possible, was going to be much more complicated. I'd be putting myself at some risk getting on a plane and going to write about people, but I also would be putting the people that I write about at risk too. If I had been on a plane and then was showing up in their lives, and that felt ethically complicated. I'd also read other oral histories, admired them a lot. It was clear pretty quickly that the pandemic was a big enough moment to merit that kind of treatment. It was like history unfolding in real time. So I just kind of decided to try it. I called my editor, David Finkel, who I've worked with for a long time, and we talked about the idea. There wasn't much of a blueprint for how to do these kind of oral history stories, and we kind of began figuring out how to do it together.
Mm-hmm. So what did that conversation look like in terms of how you were going to do it?
It looked like two people who knew nothing about what they were doing. I mean, it was like from the very basics of, okay, so if these are going to be as told to stories, so if they're going to be first person pieces told, from directly from the perspective of the people you're writing about, does that then mean journalistically and ethically they should have some control over what the piece says? Are they a participant in the journalism, or are they somebody that we are still writing about? And by that I mean, typically as journalists, we don't give people anything for participating in our work, right? We don't pay them. We can't offer them promises about what will happen once we write about them. We can't even let them read what we're writing about them until it's published, because if we do, it kind of empowers them to be the editors of their own stories. And none of us are the most fair and honest editors of our own stories. So usually we write about people, we make the decisions of what we include, and then they see it, essentially when it runs in the newspaper, which is like a tremendous act of courage for people to participate in that kind of journalism. In this case, I initially wondered, well, now, like if it's first person, if it's all coming directly from them, are they a participant? Am I showing it to them? Are we shaping it together? I think the first crucial decision that we made was that no, like that was too much control to give up. And as journalists, we're always making the decision of what quotes we include in stories, what parts of things we see we include in stories. And I still had the sort of ethical right, and I think journalistic duty to do that in this case. So that was the first choice. And then it was like, how often are we going to do these? How frequently? And I didn't know kind of how much work or how much time they would take. I tried at the beginning to write one every week. I realized pretty quickly that these were only going to be good, impactful, moving pieces if I kept people on the phone and in conversation for a long time. I mean, you know what this work is like. Like the first time that you talk to somebody, even if they're trying to be honest, even if they're trying, frankly, to be confessional, it's not possible yet. There's no trust. They don't know you well. You haven't heard enough of their story to know the right questions to ask. It takes a lot of time to work through those layers. So I think over the first few pieces, I realized I probably need to be on the phone with somebody for 10, 12 hours over the course of a week in order to have enough transcription, enough material to make a really compelling, felt, impactful, newsworthy piece.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of deciding where those stories started and ended, how much sculpting did you have to do around them? Was it picking a certain point and that's where it went stream of consciousness all the way down to the end? Or how did you do that?
I did a ton. I did a ton of sculpting. Every word in these pieces, every word in the book is a word said to me. Like these are their words, but they certainly are heavily condensed and lightly edited and also heavily structured. So, for instance, if I was talking to this woman, Darlene Krawitz, who ended up dying of COVID. And I would talk to her about the first time that she felt herself get sick, right? Like the first time she felt those first symptoms. And I might have that conversation with her 6 times over a week and a half, right? Maybe one time she mentions, well, it started with a tickle in my throat. And I do a bad job following up on that, right? And I noticed in the notes, I could have followed up better. So the next conversation, we go deeper. The next one, deeper. And then in my notes, I might have 6 different conversations about the onset of these symptoms. And what I'm doing when I'm putting the pieces together is I'm essentially going through those conversations and saying, what version of her talking about this onset of symptoms is the most true to her experience and is the best, the one that we're all going to be able to read and feel and identify with. So, I think for the most part, in terms of structure, a lot of these pieces have an element of chronology. Somebody, like in the case of Darlene, at some point gets that first symptom, and then you're following her as you would somebody in a normal story as things get worse and worse and worse, and she's no longer able to stay on the phone to have a conversation with me. So there was that. But I think, like all reporting that I've ever done, I'm thinking about structure every moment that I'm reporting. When I'm on the phone with somebody, I'm thinking, maybe this is a place where the story starts. Maybe this is a place where it ends. I'm missing this piece of motion or movement that I still really need. For me, I think structure is really pretty embedded in the whole process. Honestly, even story selection, oftentimes I'm drawn to stories because of structure. Like here's a possibility of a story that is going to begin in one place and deliver us to a place that's different. And instead of having sort of a static reading experience, we're going to start here and something's going to happen. Sometimes that's really simple. Like the last story I did for the Post was just like a house goes on the market in a place where there are tons of people who want to buy a house. What happens? Like there are going to be a lot of buyers. People come in from different places, different perspectives. Like in the end, somebody's going to get the house. That the whole story basically is like there's structure where something will change, something will happen, and that I found it's for me, when I don't know how to structure a story, that's such a hard process. When I don't, it just that usually for me means I need to go back to the reporting because I don't have a sense yet. How about for you? I'm curious with your book, because especially like you had, although many different characters and many different parts of that narrative, you're telling the story of a big thing that happened, and it's pretty structurally complicated and sophisticated with like some really artistic elements structurally too. I wonder for you if that came after you had all your notes, or if there were moments in reporting where you were like, this is the way I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're reporting, you start to see where things start and end. It helps me to have, this is my starting line and this is where I need to get to. And so filling in the reporting that way and piecing it together. Yeah, it was hard to piece it together. I think particularly books that long, you need a really strong narrative engine to keep it running. And I always joke that I wrote 3 books. There's like the bad book, the really bad book, and the book that everyone else read.
And did you realize, was it because of structure when you were feeling like it wasn't where it needed to be yet, or it was other problems?
Yeah, it was partly structure and just things being in the wrong spot, or I'm so detailed in my reporting and then I want to find a spot for every one of those details, but you have to kill your darlings and get rid of some of them.
Totally.
So just a matter of taking some stuff out as well.
For sure, which is hard. I mean, there's also, for me in some of these, I think I learned to report a little bit differently, because sometimes I think when I'm reporting a narrative story where I'm there and I'm watching things, I can be, I think one of my potential weaknesses as a journalist sometimes is impatience. Is like I can see what the story needs to be, and I make judgments almost a little too quickly, where I realize like this is the way to do it, and I close off the possibilities of something else. In part, I think because I knew in this case, first of all, they're not my stories. The stories we write never are our stories. We're always there telling somebody else's story, and it's also, I think, really important for me always to remember like the true risk, the true like act of courage, the true stakes are always on the side of the people we write about, and not for us. But in this case in particular, like the whole book is it's their stories. So I need to I think that changed in some ways. I dictated a little bit less in conversation, and also just as a matter of like basic craft, I had to keep people on the phone. The only way I could get the material I needed, like all of the transcripts were basically clay, and to gather enough clay, I had to keep somebody talking to me for 10 hours, which meant sometimes we were going down weird rabbit holes of things they were interested in. And I was like, this kind of feels like a waste of time. I don't really know where this is going to lead. But I need to get to know this person. I need them to trust me. This is the only way I can do it is by being here and being present in this conversation. And so I think I became a little bit more patient. I hope so. And I hope that's something I'll take back to the other reporting that I do too, because sometimes that patience was rewarded with like these little moments of magic that I wasn't smart enough to recognize in the moment. I mean, this one doctor in North Dakota, he, both of his parents had died of COVID. He was like the only doctor in this town. The whole town essentially was like on fire with COVID. He was the one who had to deal with all of it. So of course, in my conversations with him, that's what I wanted to talk about, right? Like his parents, his patients, what it was like to be in this community where people still weren't masking, to be trying to convince them to mask, all these people he loved and cared about, but was also angry with. But what he wanted to talk about most of the time was World War II. He was obsessed with World War II. And a lot of times during those conversations, I have to admit that privately, I was a little bit like, oh, are we still doing the World War II thing? But then when I went back through my notes, I realized that one of the things he'd been telling me about a lot was how his parents, one of the great prides of their life was that they delayed their wedding until they could get enough sugar rations to buy and make a wedding cake. And this idea of like sort of communal sacrifice and all of these things that generation sort of signified to him. And then meanwhile, both of his parents had now died because people around them in this community had not been willing to like take the virus seriously or wear a mask. So then when I was reading back through the notes and saw that, I was like, this is it. This is the story. This is the heart of the thing. And I would never have gone down that avenue if I hadn't just kind of let him ramble and take me there.
Mm-hmm. Did you repeat that theory back to him? Did he feel like that was true to him?
Yeah, definitely felt like it was true to him. Although, I don't know if I repeated it back to him. I'm sure that as I was writing and I realized like, okay, this is going to be like the piece is probably going to be building to this, to him talking about his parents during World War II. I'm sure I called him back and had more targeted conversations about the sugar rations, what he remembered about that, sort of filling all that stuff in to get more material as I often do, and I think all of us do, where the reporting in many ways continues up until the moment of publication, where you're just like, oh, I want to know about this. I still need to know about this. But I don't think I told him what was going to be in the story. I think probably people get a sense by the kind of questions that I'm asking. And sometimes if I know something is going to be really sensitive, I will walk somebody through it a little bit beforehand. And I'll say, hey, the story begins here. Then it kind of goes into this difficult part that we were talking about. Then it goes here. Then it goes here. Just to give them almost a little bit of a heads up before everybody they know, or the handful of people who read a newspaper story, read it and respond to it. But I think in that particular case, I knew that what I was writing was going to feel true to him, and I was honestly surprised in this collection and in this book that I think everybody that I wrote about, I guess everybody whose stories that I sort of curated and shared felt like they were theirs. And I think that's mostly because all the words were theirs. And for the most part, I think people thought like, wow, I really am that eloquent. Like that was a great monologue. I spoke like a 1,500 word awesome monologue. So for the most part, it felt true to them. Hasn't, there are times when that has not been true in narrative stories, and it's always painful.
Yeah. I'm curious too about the actual process of finding these people. I mean, you were just saying that you felt like you were a little impatient during the process, but it seems like that takes a lot of patience to winnow down a pool of people and figure out who has the most powerful story to tell in a really compelling way. I mean, how much legwork do you put into finding these people? And at what point do you say, okay, this isn't the right story I want to tell right now. It's actually over here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd be curious about your answer too. I mean, I think that's actually probably the place where I'm most patient in my journalism is sort of, I guess I would call it almost like the pre-reporting, figuring out what exactly the story is to write about. And I think that's largely a symptom or a credit to working at the Post and kind of figuring out what it is to be a journalist while working there. I mean, I think I realized, or I decided, or I thought, or I was told fairly early on at the Post that one way for the Post to care about narrative stories was if you connected them to a big issue, like a big national tension point, that then you would also have the permission to tell intimate, meaningful stories about people's lives that also could illuminate something bigger, right? Like I think sometimes to me, stories can fail if they're just about an issue, just about like sort of the data of something going on. That's important, but I don't tend to remember those stories. Like they don't make you feel anything. Conversely, if the story is like just a beautiful portrait of someone, but it doesn't reveal anything larger about like the world around us, that can feel like maybe it's not as big as it should be. So I kind of have come up with this weird way of trying to be like, all right, I want to do both of those things. Like try to tell, a story that feels big and reveals something about the national moment by having it be really personal and intimate in somebody's life. So usually that means that my reporting process kind of starts almost like going through a funnel, like looking at, so for instance, in the case of these voices pieces in the book, I would kind of begin the week by thinking like, what's a big tension point nationally? Like what's a fissure and where are we in the pandemic? And what's something that would feel like urgent and newsworthy and important in this moment, not evergreen, but right now. So for instance, like once there started being a ton of mask controversies, like around the country, and there were, all of these viral videos of people losing it in stores because they were asked to wear masks, et cetera. And I decided I wanted to try to write about like one of these minimum wage store clerks who was suddenly in charge of enforcing mask mandates. So first, like that's, look at the national data and who has mask mandates? Where have there been more confrontations? Where have police decided, hey, there's a mask mandate here, but we don't care, we're not enforcing it. And trying to get a sense that way. And then maybe through that, I find 10 people that I want to initially talk to. And in that case, I think I joined a Facebook group for like store clerks during the time of COVID. I called people who were in some of those viral videos. And, I'm beginning to sort of, it's a little bit like casting. I'm thinking, who are all the different possible characters? Then by talking to those 10 people. One of those conversations was with a woman named Lori, 63-year-old asthmatic woman, rightfully terrified of this virus, worked alone at a small little store in North Carolina where most people weren't wearing masks, where the police had said, we're not enforcing the mask mandate, we don't really care. And where she had sort of begun by putting up these really nice signs in front of the store, appealing to sort of the kindness of humanity by saying, wear a mask, it's a way to show that you care about us. But people still came in without masks. So her next sign was, wear a mask, it's the law. They still came in. The next sign was angrier, the next sign angrier, until eventually she was having so many of these like violent confrontations that she would leave the door to the store locked, and she would wait in like the staff room at the store until the doorbell rang, and then she would come out with a canister of mace, waiting for like the next nightmare confrontation at this little store. So then once I start talking to Lori, I realized that's the person I want to hear from. Like all these other 10 conversations that I've had, they've been really helpful. None of those people will appear obviously in this first person piece, but I know way better questions to ask because I've heard about their experiences, because I understand this landscape a little better. But then I kind of zoom in on Lori. And honestly, I think I do that because, and your job and your work at the Post is similar. Like I'm fortunate in that I don't have to write I don't write that many stories. Like the Post is really generous to say, go do stories that take a little bit more time. I think the pressure that I feel conversely is like, those stories better be pretty good. And so it's not that the stories always work out. They don't. They fail like 15 times or sometimes 100 times before I get to the person I'm writing about, right? But it's like, instead of being there on a reporting trip and being there on the third day and being like, man, this is not a good story, hopefully by putting the time into the pre-reporting, the story has failed much earlier than that. And I've decided this isn't going to work. I'm going to pivot to this other person or to this other situation. So hopefully like that also gives me confidence that once I've decided Lori is the person that I want to listen to, and Lori's is the story that I think people really need to hear, I can feel confident in that because she's not the first person I've called. I haven't just stumbled into her and thought, wow, this is a really good story. I've arrived in that place for a reason and through reporting. So I guess I've kind of become weirdly loyal to that process.
Yeah.
How about you? I mean, do do you start big, narrow, and small? Do you like where's your entry point usually?
Yeah, I mean, I try and talk to as many people as I can, similarly to what you said, and yeah, it helps you ask better questions along the way and have deeper conversations, and then at some point you hit the right person, and I think you just kind of have that instinct, right, where you're like, okay, this is where the story is, and this is who I need to be writing about right now.
Totally. And then
But
that like, are there times when that instinct has been proven really wrong?
I feel like it's pretty accurate most of the time, but
Yeah,
again, you just have to be patient through it because you end up doing a lot of reporting and talking with a lot of people who aren't necessarily what you're looking for, and it can be very easy to get frustrated during that process.
totally.
But then
Yes,
when
it
you
can.
find the right person, it's like Christmas Day where you're like, yes, this is what I was waiting for.
I know. And then all you have to do is build a remarkable amount of trust with that person, find out a ton of information, and carry that trust through to publication. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Easy as
And
that.
then write the story too and figure out the structure. So
Yeah,
easy peasy, easy
basically
peasy.
not nonstop stress at every part of the process. And I think like the trust building part, I find the most complicated, and in some ways the most interesting. Like it's
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of why every story, every writing project that we do is different, is because people are enormously complicated, and every time you're trying to figure out how to build trust in this really weird role of being, an observer in somebody's life, not their friend, not their advocate, but wanting them to tell you things that they would never tell anybody else in their life, things
Mm-hmm.
that maybe they would only confide to a close friend, and they would confide them to the friend with the expectation that that friend would tell nobody. And meanwhile, we're strangers and we're like, please tell us, we're going to tell everybody. It's like such an enormous thing to ask. And so the act of building that kind of trust every time, I think like that never gets easy for me. It also never gets old because it's really complicated and interesting.
Yeah. How do you navigate that, the building of trust, particularly when you can't go and meet these people that you're writing about?
Yeah, that was harder. I mean, much harder, I would say. But I think, you know, please tell me if you found any, because I've definitely been looking, but I don't think that there are shortcuts. I think building trust essentially is a matter of being present, I think proving to people in some way that you're listening to them, and also that you're, for me, that I'm not coming to them from a place of judgment. That's not often my job as a journalist. I'm coming from a place of understanding. I'm trying to figure out why something is happening to them, why they think the way that they do, and I think also like you can't sort of fake your way into trust either. You have to be, I think, genuine in your curiosity and genuine in your interest and hopefully genuine in your empathy. So that also goes back to story selection. I think I have an easier job building trust, frankly, because I'm often fortunate enough to choose the stories that I'm doing, and I'm choosing them because in some way I care. Like there's this idea in, or at least there was at Syracuse. I don't want to throw other journalism schools under the bus, but I'll throw my own under the bus, at least in this small way. There's this idea that like you have to have almost like a professional remove as a journalist. Like not only should you be unbiased, and we can certainly spend hours debating what that word means, but you should be almost like uncaring, and
Mm-hmm.
you should write about things purely as somebody watching like from behind a glass. And for me anyway, I that advice makes no sense. Like if you don't care in some way about the things that you're writing about, and I don't mean as an advocate, but if you aren't curious, if you're not moved by what you're seeing or hearing, if you don't feel anything, how can you ever expect somebody who's never met these people, who will never meet these people, to feel anything? Like I think like our like putting some of our own care and I try to put myself in stories that make me feel like that's kind of the biggest driver of what I always want to write about. So, I think that's part of it too, is that I'm going to places where I never have to costume my own, interest. I'm there because I really do want to hear about something and figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Were there
How,
any?
how about you? I'm like, are there not tricks? That's not the right word, but are there like ways that you have found are like repeatedly good to build trust with people, or conversely, things like mistakes you've made or things that you've done that have cut to trust really quickly?
Yeah, I think it's like you were saying, you have to pick stories that speak to you. And I think people can tell when you're interested and you're very present and you're asking good questions. I think that's how you build trust. And I think also just being very transparent about the process. I always remind myself that, we might be the only journalist that these people ever talk to. They don't understand how the process works. So just
Right.
being very upfront with them at the beginning, saying like, this is how I do my reporting. And then you might not hear from me for a little bit because I'll be writing, and then I'll come back and accuracy check with you. And, if you have any questions for me, ask anytime. Like, I'm happy to explain it again. And I
Yeah.
think that really helps out a lot too, because then it's not like, they're like, why is she still standing in the corner watching me
Right.
do this thing? Right. They're like, oh, I get it. She's like taking notes and looking for things. And I'll say
Totally.
like, yeah, I'll be looking for details and how you interact with the world. And that
Yeah.
really helps too. And it just takes time.
Totally. And it's also like, of course they're confused, right? Like what we do in so many ways is not intuitive. Like, hey, I've never met you before. You've probably never talked to a reporter before. Until this moment, you didn't really think that anything that was going on with you was necessarily newsworthy. But I would like to come and pay total full attention to you and nothing but you for a fairly long amount of time, and then write about it. Also, you have no control over it. Like that's like what
It's
a
a big
crazy thing to
ask.
ask. Yeah, exactly. It's so much. So I think you're exactly right. I do the same thing. I'm always kind of like, if you have questions about why I want to know something or why I'm asking something, ask me, please. Like I'm going to be asking you a lot of things. So like, by all means, feel free to ask me anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that really helps. And there's always the moment too, where I think they realize that you're watching everything they do, right? You're
Yeah.
like,
And
again,
like, especially for narrative reporting, I think sometimes success is like a matter of getting over yourself and your own awkwardness, right?
mm-hmm.
Like your own feelings of, because just as a person, sometimes you've been around somebody for a long enough time, and it's, for me anyway, it's kind of my instinct where I start to kind of get the feeling like I'm getting weird. Like I should probably go now. Like it's kind of strange that I'm still, you know, in this diner with this family when something hard is happening, or at this doctor's appointment and hearing the things that I'm hearing. You can almost, just I think all of our natural disposition is like, once you get to a place of real intimacy and seeing something that's raw, there's like a little bit of a human instinct to step away.
Mm-hmm.
I have to fight against that. And I think like the thing that helps me is by thinking about my responsibility to not only the story, but to the people that we write about. Like if I'm there, it's because they've decided that I should be there. And if what I'm trying to do is do justice to them and their experience, then me stepping away from like the hard or awkward or complicated moments of that experience because of my own comfort level, that's not fair to them.
Yeah.
And I think that thinking about it that way has helped me.
Mm-hmm. I always see that as a sign too. And I'm like, oh, I've been here a long time. I'm like, okay, that means I need to stay like another few hours and
Totally. Yeah.
not go away.
For me, it's either that or it's just like, I need coffee. Oh my God. Like, please let me go to a Starbucks somewhere or something.
Was there any part of this process, I mean, writing all of these oral histories and then taking them and turning them into a book, that surprised you? That was different?
I think a lot surprised me. I mean, I guess I would say the biggest thing is that like so much of this last like year and a half has been such an isolating experience. And for almost every person that I talked to, there was almost like an existential loneliness, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we've all been like, isolated into our own homes, our own physical spaces, our own bubbles, our own pods, like certainly in this country at this moment, our own ideological bunkers. Like we're so divided. And we're I think we can all sometimes feel like we're so alone floating through this space. And I guess like the most hopeful part of most reporting for me, but certainly this reporting, was that some people might think that to spend a year in intense conversation with people who are often in the middle of remarkable trauma would be depressing or draining or taxing. But the truth is, most of the time for me, it was the opposite. The fact that people, while they were going through some of the worst moments of their life, still had the capacity to build trust with a stranger, to be honest, to speak about their lives with emotional courage. To me, that was remarkable every single time, and that was true for people who I agreed with and didn't agree with. And I guess in a year that in so many ways, or years now, that in so many ways feel like defined by political dysfunction and systemic failure, to be reminded of the humanity was often almost restorative. It was, I was grateful to be able to listen to these people's stories and to help tell them.
Yeah. I mean, they took something that felt very abstract, I think, to a lot of people and made them tangible and brought meaning to it.
I hope so. And it was really interesting to write. I got more, in terms of reader feedback from these stories, and I got more email from these stories than from anything else I'd ever written. Granted, most of the time,
really?
the email was not addressed to me; it was addressed to Dear Burnell or whoever story I'd been writing, right? But I think the intensity of the direct connection from somebody in first person writing to an audience, there was no, if I was doing this right, and this is true, I hope, with the way that narrative stories often work too, but particularly in this case, if I was doing my job right, my presence was not felt at all in these pieces. And people felt like they were hearing directly from the person kind of in the line of fire. And that's a powerful way to deliver a message. I did not finish this book or this project thinking that I wanted to be an oral historian. There are way too many things that I miss about the power of being with people and getting to observe parts of their lives. It's also just more fun. And my favorite parts of the job are when I'm with the people that I'm reporting on. But I did finish this with great admiration for the kind of power that this kind of storytelling can have. I really think it fosters this really immediate connection between the subject and the reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curious how you decided when to stop, because the pandemic is obviously ongoing. At what point did you decide, okay, this?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to one of my weaknesses as a journalist and maybe as a person, patience. I think I realized after doing 25, 30 of these, however many I had done, that I wasn't learning as much from everyone as I was before. I kind of I had figured some things out, and I knew how to do it, and then it became not less interesting, because the people were always really interesting, but a little bit less challenging, and I didn't want to feel like I was just sort of hitting the repeat button. That wasn't fair to myself or to anybody that I was going to be doing this with. So I think that's probably when I knew, but I also knew I needed, for the run of reporting in the Post and also for the book, I needed an end. And so I thought early on that a vaccine, and once that vaccine is rolling out, was likely where I would sort of pivot back to more in-person narrative reporting. And of course, as it turned out, I could have done another year of this, and unfortunately probably will be able to do another year from now. I mean, it's just this pandemic doesn't seem to want to end, and even when it does end, another lesson from this reporting, not a surprise to me, or I'm sure to you after writing a lot of stories about America, but the pandemic will eventually end. But for those of us who are privileged enough to have it end, I mean, the inequality that's at the worsening inequality that's so much at the heart of what America is going to be made, and has already been made so much worse by this pandemic. Anybody who was vulnerable before, in terms of their health, in terms of their economic status, that vulnerability has been exacerbated in a million ways. So the long legacy of this pandemic, I think, will make all of those things worse. And I hope our reporting takes us into those places to tell those stories.
Yeah. How does it feel having a book with such a neat and tidy beginning and end come out during a pandemic that it has no neat and tidy beginning and end.
Yeah, really, really weird. But I also think endings are the hardest part of every story and every project because they are inherently arbitrary. Like people's lives don't end when we stop writing about them. We hope, at least most of the time, right? Like that's I think one of the most complicated ethical choices that we make in every story that we write is, especially if we're writing about somebody who's not written about a lot or might not be written about again, we're deciding like where their story ends in the public space. That's like a that's a heavy burden. Like you're going to sort of walk somebody out of the spotlight, and you have to do that in a way that's true and also fair. And so, I think I've come to terms with the fact that like endings are something we decide on. They're not something that happens. And certainly when I'm reporting, I'm always looking for endings, because you want an end to feel satisfying, and you also want like an end to feel like something has ended, something has changed, concluded. There's been some kind of arc in the thing you've been writing or the thing you've been observing that has hopefully in some small way completed. But then of course the truth is, like, we finish, we go back to our lives, and the people that we've written about, they go back to their lives, and they're still most of the time dealing with the same problems and the same traumas and the same things that we've been documenting. So I think, endings are always inherently messy.
Yeah. Were there any endings from this series that you weren't satisfied with, or that didn't end up where you wanted them to be?
Yes, I'm sure. Yes, hopefully, like I've forgotten some of those moments, but I would say almost every, endings, because I think they're kind of like I think they're the most important part of stories. Like certainly a longer, narrative story. If you're asking somebody to read 1,200, 1,500, much less like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 words, or a book, like you want to feel like you've delivered them to not only like a conclusion, but also to like an emotional place, right? I kind of think about, when you see back when like movie theaters were a thing and we could go to them, like when you watch a really good movie, and afterwards like the credits start to roll, but you don't really want to get up yet. You're still just like, whoa, like that, like it kind of leaves you in place and hits you. That I think is what the best stories do. And it's endings, I think, that make us really remember things. Like that's, so for every story, I'm, I rarely like the ending because I feel like the stakes are really high. And there are times when I'm reporting and I see and I know where a story will end, and it's that feels almost like the greatest reporting gift, because for me, that's also when I know I can begin to write. If I know the end, I'm going to structure backwards toward the end, so I know I can begin to build the scaffolding of the story, and then I can go write it. So there's a lot of I always put a lot of pressure on that part of the process. How about you? Like, did you know for sure where your book was going to end, and when you were done reporting?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to the pandemic, right? So I wrote a book about California's deadliest wildfire, and obviously the impacts of that fire will be going on for a very long time. Those people's lives don't just go back to normal. And so I wanted to end the book on a note of hope, on the fact that these people were trying to regain what was lost. But again, it was just picking a point and realizing that it had to end somewhere, or it would just drag on and on and on.
Yeah.
So it was a tough decision, but I was happy with where the book ended too.
It's super hard. So how did you decide? Like, how did you know? And when did you know?
I think it's just very instinctual for me, right? Where I'll see a scene or a piece of dialogue or something in the environment. I'm like, oh, that's where it ends. Right. And then very similar to you, working backwards to that point, I'll usually have a general sense of where the story begins. And then I need to know where it ends. Otherwise, I don't know what I'm writing to or what I'm reporting to.
Yeah. My editor, David, I remember him telling a story of the ending of his last book. And when he saw it, he was like there with the people he was writing about, saw something. He was like, this is the end. And then he said he was in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and he just like waved goodbye to them and got in the car as fast as he could. He was like, I don't want to see anything else. This is the end. I have to leave now, or I'm gonna start thinking differently. Just like left in the middle of, they were like all about to have lunch, and he was like, oh, see you later. And then he's like, that's the end. I'm done. So that's a dramatic walk off.
Yeah, I've had those moments before where I'm like gunning it back to the hotel room. I'm like, I've got to write it down now.
Right, totally. Go. Yeah, I mean, that's also like, I don't know, the for your book, one thing that I thought about a lot too is this not only the structuring, but the actual physical note taking and the organizational part of it. Did you use like a program? Did you? I'm just I guess just because it's the only thing I've ever done, I just like do everything in Microsoft Word and put it in like different folders. And I'm sure it's like a totally arcane way to do it. But how did you keep your notes, and how did you like, yeah, what was your like filing process basically?
Yeah, just Google Docs. I
Google
don't have
Docs,
any
okay.
fancy apps that I use.
Yeah.
You know, I'll have a file for each person that I've talked with, and then I'll group them under like the cluster theme of like, these were all the people that were in this one place. And then every time I talk to them, I'll just start at the top of the doc and write the date and the time and be like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. I mean, yeah, my last book before this, it was almost comical, where I had like, 580 Microsoft Word documents. Eventually at the end, I just changed the name of every one of them to a number. So it'd be like number 357. And then when I was structuring, I'd be like, this quote is in 357. I mean, it was, it made me think I should maybe look into like one of those programs that tracks notes.
Yeah, probably. But I feel like, I don't know, the system works. I'm like, that would be a lot of
totally.
effort.
Yeah. Change is scary. We'll just keep doing it the way we're doing it. Yeah.
So what comes next for you? What are you writing about next now that it's not?
Well, I'm finishing a screenplay job. It's actually about COVID. It's about the creation of the vaccines. But I have to be done with that at the end of this week. So I guess I will be done with it at the end of this week. And then
got 2 days.
Yeah, exactly. For the post, I'm not honestly quite sure yet. I have some ideas. But the main thing is that I think I find it difficult. Maybe it's just because it's where my head has been. But I think whatever I'll be writing will be tied in at least some way to the pandemic. It just still feels like, the thing to write about in terms of the way it is shaping and reshaping this country politically, in terms of disinformation, all of those various ways, our healthcare system. So I'm guessing I'll try to find my way in there. What about for you?
I'm still getting used to a brand new job, so
kind of a big thing. This is one thing that I think about sometimes. And like, your book does a very good job being about something that's dramatic and about people, but also climate change, right? And I think I've never really written about climate change because it's like too big for me to get. It just feels intimidating, because once you start thinking about climate change and writing about climate change, then really writing about anything else seems stupid. It's like there's this screaming thing over here, like this is the thing, and everything else can kind of start to feel like a distraction. So maybe I've been lazy and going after the distractions, and I wonder if when you finished writing that book, you felt that way, and if you feel a responsibility then to write more about it, or if you're like, I did my job of that, and now I'll write about other things while the world disintegrates.
Yeah, I by the time I finished that book, I was like, man, I cannot just wake up every day in the morning and think about how we are killing our planet and we're headed toward a deep, dark place. And I was like, I just can't do that anymore. So I'm very happy writing about other distracting, terrible things happening in the world.
Right. The small problems that are also massive.
The smaller massive problems. Yeah.
That's good. That should be like your Twitter tagline, writer of the smaller massive problems.
So we don't have any Q&As, but Ian said that he misses us in the newsroom and that you should come over for an oat milk latte.
Let's do it. Oat milk latte, though. That sounds a little fancy. I haven't ventured down the oat milk path, but probably good. Probably good for climate
Very
change.
good.
Very
Better
good.
don't drink almond milk. That's the one thing I will say.
Okay. All right. Well, for Ian, I'll try it. That would be delightful. And yeah, thanks. I mean, Lizzie, thanks so much for doing this. So fun to get to catch up and chat with you. And thanks to Linda, Ian, others who came and who watched. I love thinking about and talking about journalism. So Lizzie,
Yeah.
truly a treat to do it with you.
Right back at you.
Awesome. All right, go back out and harvest the crop.
I will do my best.
Let's go. Get the soybeans in. What is the harvest like? It's now, right? Over the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's
3
crazy.
weeks?
There's a lot going on here.
Can you correct me on something really quickly?
Yeah.
I was driving. We were in Montana last weekend for a wedding, and we drove from Oregon. And over Montana, it was just one of those like crazy moons. And I was like, oh, harvest moon. Is that actually a thing? Is the harvest moon? Is it different than other moons? Is it just a saying in October or September?
This is something I should have an answer to. I'll have to go ask my parents. They would definitely know.
Ask your dad, and he can think about it tomorrow for 12 hours on the lawn.
When he's on the mower. Yeah, this is all stuff that in my teenage years, I was like, no, I don't want any part of it. And now I wish I knew.
Okay, well, this is like, I'm sure you really wanted to end this with a new reporting project, but I'm very curious about the harvest moon.
I will report back and let you know, Eli.
All right. Thanks,
Bye.
Lizzie.
Alrighty, y'all. Well, we've reached the top of the hour, and it's been an honor to host Eli and Lizzie. So thank you all for joining us with At Home with Literati tonight. Thank you to all our viewers, and make sure to buy Voices from the Pandemic. Link is in the chat. Alrighty. Have a good night, y'all.
Thanks,
Take it
guys.
easy. Thank you, Eli.
Thanks.